I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Old's Oscar Countdown. And this week we're going to be looking at one of the most peculiar movie stars, particularly when viewing it from a modern lens, the ultimate 70s action hero badass. I'm talking about Charles Bronson. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is look at an actor, break down their career, sort of chart it into 3 different chapters by getting a defining movie in that chapter and trying to understand their career arc from beginning until the end and the different types of movies that they did. So it's an easy way to talk about movies as well as understanding their sort of role and their sort of changing, evolving element of their career. And then in the sort of last half of the video, I try to break down their defining feature. What is it that makes this actor so unique, so interesting, so great, and what is their movie star magic? But I really appreciate if you comment down below. Let me know your thoughts on the actor or just the series in general. This is the reason why I do these episodes, is to get that fan feedback, so I'd really appreciate it if you were to do that. But if not, subscribe to the channel, like the video, those things help as well. Now, starting into chapter 1 of the sort of career arc of Charles Bronson, I'm titling this first chapter The Quiet Friend. And Bronson was sort of unlike an actor like a Val Kilmer or Meryl Streep, who sort of hit the ground running. He's a guy that the American audiences really had to warm up to. As a matter of fact, he did a lot of these sort of supporting roles before even going to Europe to become a lead star, before Americans sort of warmly accepted him back as a leading man. But in the sort of first chapter, his 50s, but really for the most part his 60s, with movies like The Dirty Dozen and The Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape, these large piece, war-focused ensemble movies in which he is always sort of the quiet friend. He is the guy that is very sort of tied to the main protagonist. He's always sort of the reliable, trustworthy, loyal one. And because we like, say, a Steve McQueen, we by proxy like Charles Bronson's character, just because, hey, we like the main character, so therefore we'll like sort of the quiet friend, the one that the main character trusts. And he's always sort of great at having very little dialogue, but sort of showing up for one scene, explaining his backstory, and he's always a specialist in many ways. He's very good at doing one thing, whether it being The Great Escape, telling holes, or even something like The Dirty Dozen, in which he's sort of the rebel with the cause, we'll call him. But in these early periods, he's excelled at that, and he's really great in these sort of war movies or these Western movies that focus on the ensemble, and he's sort of just one piece of it. And then for me, the defining role of this chapter for him is Once Upon a Time in the West, which is of course a classic Western, and really the sort of end of his period. This is when he starts to go to Europe to try to become a leading man, but I still think of it as a sort of 60s period for Bronson, because this is very much an ensemble piece still. Even though he is sort of the lead, the sort of main hero of the movie, you still got Henry Fonda, you still got Jason Robards, and their storylines do have a significant portion of the runtime. So he is, in my opinion, still sort of the ensemble piece, but ultimately a defining role for this period because he's a large part of the ensemble and is sort of one of the biggest stars of the movie. And he is just one of the classic Western stars in the sense that you just put him in a close-up with his sort of sunburnt, sort of leathery face, and he's kind of put some dirt on him and a cowboy hat, and it just looks perfect. And so much of the success of Once Upon a Time in the West is just the close-up of his face being, I think, so probably the most authentic sort of cowboy actor, along with someone like a Clint Eastwood. Bronson, I think, just fits so perfectly within that mold. And his sort of air of confidence that he has within this movie, and almost borderlining on menace in many instances, where he slowly takes his time, he's very cool, he's very confident, he always has things in control, and that sort of sense of confidence, I think, airs, of course, a sense of coolness to him, but also sort of a reliability and a trust, because you sort of see him as the sort of main hero type. His sort of reluctancy to sort of speed things up, his sort of ability to slow things down and toy with things, almost as if he knows the fate in which he sort of does of himself and of the characters around him. He knows what's going to happen, and he's not going to rush that. And the movie doesn't rush it at all. Maybe that's a little bit of a flaw of the movie, but Bronson, in all the scenes, has definitely sort of got the upper edge, definitely feels cool and confident, and always in control. And that's what makes him such an interesting screen presence, because yes, he looks like he's someone from this era just plucked out, and he looks like someone from 1868, in a movie in 1968. but more so, I think, his ability to stay calm and cool adds sort of a unique layer of believability, authenticity, but also sort of tension that he brings to the film just from his performance. So Once Upon a Time in the West is sort of the defining role of this sort of ensemble-driven, quiet friend chapter of Charles Bronson. Then in the second chapter, I'm going to title this one The Urban Cowboy, because it's after he's sort of gone to Europe and become a big star there. He's come back to the States and is starting to get more, definingly leading roles. So you have movies like Red Sun, or the clear example being The Mechanic, and then or The Valachi Papers. But also, I think this period here is not sort of a defined year like certain actors. I'd probably say from the mid 60s to like 75, 77, because we have certain roles like Walter Hill's Hard Times that he's really terrific in, or Telephone in 77, in which he's sort of the main lead guy. He's often playing a professional. That's why I call this one The Urban Cowboy, because either he's sort of a cowboy figure set in the modern day, or he's very much literally a cowboy, or he's in that sort of time period in a movie like Red Sun. But in this period, he's always sort of a professional. He's always someone that's very good at their job, who's very sort of task-oriented. Oftentimes in the movie, he's given a task, and he succeeds at doing that, and the joy and the pleasure of seeing him in these leading roles is just his ability to stay stoic, stay sort of quiet, but because he's so successful at his job, he sort of excels and does at that. So it's almost like you watched a movie like The Magnificent Seven, you go, man, all these guys are so great. I wonder what his movie is. I wonder what that looked like. And we actually get to see what this sort of quiet friend, professional kind of a guy is able to do. But naturally, I think the defining role of this period for me is The Mechanic, because on one hand, it's a classic Charles Bronson movie in the sense that he is so great at his actions, and he's so great at executing a job. So, and that's sort of the excitement that I get, at least from a Charles Bronson movie. It's like, okay, this guy, he's sort of this undefeatable force that's going to complete this task in excellent precision and time, and there's nothing that's going to stop it. So his professionalism, particularly in this movie, is at its peak. Just the opening sequence with the gun and the stove, and even the second sequence after that being a professional hitman. So the movie is great at that, at sort of showing us the professionalism and the excitement and joy that comes from that, which comes from a lot of Charles Bronson movies. But I think this one is a little bit more interesting in that we actually try to understand the internal life of his character. Oftentimes we'll see a 1 minute sort of tragic backstory in later Bronson movies, particularly the Death Wish movies. There's not really an explanation because they're sequels, but what this movie is so great at is just having that sort of dilemma of, this is a guy who's really great at his job, who's a professional, and he's a hitman, and to be successful at this job he needs to live a certain way, a certain life. But of course, the movie also explores, in this movie, which I think is a better version, the movie explores the sort of cons of that life, the fact that he's lonely all the time, the fact that he sees, a little protege, in this case, in the second half of the movie, to sort of learn and to teach his skills to. But of course, the sort of dramatic tension being that the protege is the son of a man he just killed. So that's going to come up, there's sort of a tension there, and that sort of intellectually it's wrong, because if you want to be a hitman you have to live this lonely life. That's the style. You can't get lazy, but you also understand this is a lonely man. We have a couple sort of scenes, particularly with the woman, which is an interestingly staged scene as we sort of develop and learn more about their relationship. So you understand this sort of intense loneliness that really comes with this job. So you understand emotionally why he would want to connect with sort of a protege and have someone beside him. So it's sort of a great balance where we have the professionalism and the hitman and the action sequences, and he's really great at that, but also getting to a little bit more understand a little bit more of the internal life. It's a great character for Bronson, and I think he really excels at doing that too. Then in chapter 3, I'm going to title this one The Revenge Retributionist, and this is really probably starting in 1974 and going out throughout the rest of his career. Like I said, there's some odd ones like Telephone or Hard Times, but really from 74 you have Mr. Majestic and you have Death Wish, and then from then on out you have 4 other Death Wish movies. You have Kinjite, you have The Evil That Men Do, and we really see Bronson excel in the revenge movie, which is sort of a vehicle that I think he's probably most known for, even more so than the sort of quiet friend ensemble war movies that are so iconic. Dirty Dozen, Great Escape, Magnificent Seven, what have you. But I think actually he's probably a little bit more well known for this, for the Death Wishes, these sort of revenge movies that he was so prolific at making, because it's sort of a perfect vehicle for Bronson. We know that he's best when he's not talking a lot, and when he's just looking cool, and when he can complete a task. And these revenge movies have a very sort of simple man on a mission. We get 20 minutes or less of a tragic backstory relating to, the death of a wife or children, or the death of a best friend's wife, and he has to come back into action. But it's also very simple and sort of easily understandable, so that we see this guy, he's a guy who's been wronged, everyone agrees he's been wronged, you get instant sympathy for his character with minimal sort of backstory. We don't have to trust Bronson to give a big emotional speech. We just sort of see it, this is a terrible thing, it's a rape, it's a murder, it's something. Okay, now he has to go on and get revenge. Now he is a man on a mission. So it's a very clear sort of path for Bronson, because he's so great at executing tasks, at being professional, at being that sort of man on a mission, while also giving him sort of an interesting tragic backstory in sort of the most simplistic way. So it just allows us to get to those great action scenes that Bronson's able to do. And in terms of defining a role for this period, you ultimately have to go with Death Wish. I mean, there's a couple of good runs. Even something like The Death Hunt is an interesting movie, or Kinjite, or some of the later Bronson movies. But I think Death Wish does it best, because it's almost like the first Rocky or the first Rambo movie, where the first Death Wish is very different in many ways to the later Death Wishes. When we were talking about Death Wish 3 or 4, he's just sort of a killing machine. But in this sort of origin story type movie, it's fascinating to see that Bronson is not sort of a retired veteran. I mean, if you think about the movies, action movies that we see today that are similar to Bronson, it's like Taken or John Wick. This guy who's a retired assassin, retired veteran, retired guy that you just don't want to mess with. Somebody messes with him and it goes, too bad, you're going to all die now. But with Death Wish, it's so fascinating and surprised me when I saw the movie for the first time, was that this is just an architect. This is just a regular guy. And we spent a lot of time in a pretty gruesome rape scene, and in some of the sort of early parts of the movie where we see the mother die, and then his daughter sort of be completely broken from this movie. And we spent a lot of time trying to sort of rehabilitate her and trying to reconnect with her until he's sort of pushed to the edge. So that's what becomes so interesting about the movie, is that yes, he's great at sort of doing this sort of action scenes, but we don't get a lot of action in this movie that really is, I think, a sort of morality tale, where we see just this terrible thing happen over and over again. We see this man just lose everything that he really loves and struggle with that. And then you see him sort of do one killing, and he carries a gun around with him, and then it's like, well, he's only killing muggers, so there's something morally correct about that, but then he's also killing people, so there's sort of this moral conflict where you truly sympathize and empathize with the situation, how terrible it is, and you, if you're honest with yourself, really want him to get that revenge. But he still is sort of doing something that is illegal and probably morally incorrect, but it sort of feels good. So it has that sort of moral conflict and struggle at it, which I think is, when we talk about 70s movies like Taxi Driver or French Connection, we're always talking about, the seedy underbelly of New York and stuff, and it's like, no, movies like Death Wish is really the grime and the seedy sort of disgusting, gross, but kind of honest and truthful 70s movies. I mean, that's just when you really get into the nitty-gritty of it. And of course it spawned so many more sequels, so this becomes Bronson's sort of signature role. So we have to sort of mention it here as an iconic role, even though it's maybe not the most prototypical of the sort of revenge retributionist third chapter of his career, which eventually rides out into the 90s. Now talking about the defining feature of Charles Bronson, which is the title of the video, which is The Professional. That he is so great at being a professional, at being a guy who's really great at his job, which, those are some of my favorite movies. Michael Mann does them, Tom Hanks in his later sort of period here have just been guys, playing guys who are just really good at their jobs. But I think Charles Bronson, in a certain way, was the originator of that. He's very, I think, indebted to the modern action movies of today, that when we look at Liam Neeson action movies, and when we look at John Wick action movies, it's a similar sort of conceit as Bronson, where it's like, this is a guy you don't want to mess with, there's a cool confidence, there's an impending doom to the movies, and in John Wick, John Wick's going to win. That's the sort of appeal of it. It's like, you mess with the wrong guy, now time to pay. And similarly with Bronson, it's like, you killed his wife, guess what, this guy's going to get it done. Or the mechanic, this is the best hitman there is, he's going to execute on that job. But more so than anything other character, the Charles Bronson archetype is very clear. I mean, when we talk about other actors, they have movie star sort of elements and connectivity throughout their movies, but they're doing all these different sort of strange choices. But a Charles Bronson movie, I think, is very defined. He doesn't stray too far away from his archetype, and you know what? That's why people like him. That's why he's a movie star. That's why, you know, he was successful at doing that, because he stuck within his type. He stuck within his sort of talent pool. But I also don't want to make it seem that Bronson's just this sort of generic guy who's just good in action movies, because there is a real sort of craft behind his acting and his skill within his movies. Because it's strange, on one hand, you look at it and you go, the modern day action movies today are like the Jason Stathams, the sort of slick, bald, muscular guys. But when you look at Charles Bronson, it's like an ethically ambiguous guy with a Justin Bieber, early 2000s haircut, with a stringy mustache. It's like, this is a weird sort of archetype or word prototype. But when you see him on screen, because I think you're able to sort of mask his height difference, and also because of the way he carries himself, there is a coolness and sort of a professionality and a professionalism, to his movies. And I think, the most similar actor that you would compare him to would be someone like a Buster Keaton or Charlie Chaplin, because he doesn't say much in his movies, and he's fine at delivering dialogue. I don't think that's necessarily his strength, probably a little bit underrated, but he's great in his physicality. That so much of his ability to do these action scenes are not just his physical ability, but it's actually his physical acting, how he's actually carrying himself. If you notice, one thing that I saw after watching a bunch of Charles Bronson movies is that he never moves very fast. He's always slow, he's always deliberate, and he's always sort of in control of stuff. So because he's slow, because he's deliberate, because his pace is sort of relaxed, it immediately gives us, the audience, the indication that, oh, this guy knows what he's doing. This guy's done this a million times. He's not gonna freak out in this scenario. He's gonna make a kill, and it's gonna be like another day on the job. And that's what's interesting about Bronson, is why I always consider him more of a physical actor, because he's doing so many of these action scenes, but he's making them believable, and he's making them interesting and engaging because of his attention to detail, because of sort of the slow pace, because of the confidence he always brings, and because of that sort of joy of that impending doom. It's the same reason why I still like John Wick movies. It's because we know what's going to happen at the end of the movie, and we want to see it happen. And I think Bronson sort of tapped into that early on. So I call him the professional because he's so great at doing people who are great at their jobs, at executing on a task, at being calm, cool, and collected, which makes, I think, a great fit within the sort of revenge action genre, because he's a man on a mission. He is a man obsessed and a man determined to sort of seek and enact his revenge. And Bronson is totally, I think, influential in the modern day action hero because of his ability to sort of define that. And you may not like Charles Bronson movies, but there's a thing. Charles Bronson movies exist. I think the way he carries himself, particularly because of his physical appearance, is not sort of typical. It's very much atypical, in my opinion. So his ability to look cool and look badass and not be sincere and be sort of stoic and strict and make these action sequences cool and make us relatable to him is an incredible acting feat that maybe has been appreciated as much as it should have, and still is under discussed, his acting ability, just because he's not doing these big dialogue scenes. But I do think that's something that we need to talk more about. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your favorite Charles Bronson movies. Were there some that I mentioned that I haven't seen that you really like? Maybe give me a Death Wish ranking. I'd love to hear that in the comments down below. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.